Welcome to Lee County Pod. Today we are talking about one poem. Pete, could you introduce our poem today?
Thank you, Jack. The title of the poem for today is Driving to Town Late to Mail a Letter by Rober Bly. And if you notice, the title itself consists of a time, late, and a place, simply expressed as town.
Okay. Could you please read it to us?
Sure. It is a cold and snowy night. The main street is deserted. The only things moving are swirls of snow. As I lift the mailbox door, I feel its cold iron. There is a privacy I love in this snowy night. Driving around, I will waste more time.
Okay. So what is your initial reaction to that?
My initial reaction, I think, is how the central image in the poem, which to me is opening the door of the mailbox to drop the letter in, how I can see that and hear it and feel it. He says in that line, I feel its cold iron. And we notice also, he doesn't give the detail of the handle of the door for the mailbox, but as I recall, such doors do have handles, but he simply says, as I lift the mailbox door, I feel its cold iron. So it's that line right in the dead center of the poem that grabs me first off, but a lot more too.
Okay. What other things jump out at you?
Well, for one thing, I'm looking at it on page 38 of Bly's first book, Silence in the Snowy Fields, and seeing it on the page, one can't help but notice that the first line is conspicuously longer than the other lines. And if you Google the poem up and it's laid out correctly, you could see that too. And so I say to myself, why did Rober Bly lay it out that way? For example, why didn't he put the second sentence? The first line is composed of two sentences. Why did Bly not go ahead and put the main street is deserted as line 2 instead of leaving it all on one line? And we go back to the axiom or maxim, whatever. Poetry is more about questions than answers. Our previous YouTube segment with talking about Suzanne McClary's poems, Rodeo. I know she's a big Robert Bly fan, and she would be a good person to posit this question to, I'm sure, Suzanne Clary, author of The Odds. But how would putting, here's another question though, how would that change the poem as a whole? Well, quite obviously, it would make the poem 6 lines instead of 5, but other than that, I would simply say the first line, the whole first line, elaborates on the title, and with the word deserted, evokes a mood, and deserted is the last word in the first line. So these are small things, but little things add up in a poem to mean a lot, and it evokes. It starts to establish a mood. Let's say.
Right. What I find that reading through this, it's not necessarily so much what's written on the page, it's what's not there. You don't have a long description of the environment. You don't have a lot of verbiage that describes actions. It's very short, very simple, but highly evocative. For example, the description of the snow swirling, that comes right into the mind. Excuse me. Again, the description of the snow swirling, you can see that happening in the street. That you don't need the description of the street necessarily to understand the image that's being presented. You say that you're in town, but you don't have a description of the town, but everyone can see the buildings of the town from their own perspective, from the reader's perspective. You don't necessarily have a description of the mailbox, but everyone is familiar enough with official mailboxes to know how they are constructed and how they operate. So whether it's a drop in the side of a building or whether it's a freestanding USPS blue box, there's still a lid to be lifted. There's still a slot that you put the letter into, and you don't need to have everything described. You can already see it inside your head, and that's what makes the poem effective, is that the reader can see everything that's happening inside their head without 10 stanza describing every minute detail. And I think that's what attracts me to this particular poem, is how sparse it is in its language, and yet so evocative in the overall result of that language.
Yeah, and a good example of less means more, and being very selective with what you include in the poem. One thing I like is the idea that life itself is change, and change is alive and well in a poem too, and it involves a modulation of what I guess of in this instance the images. I can almost feel the swirls of snow, and they're how do you say that word? Buoyant?
Buoyant.
Yeah, sorry. I do have it spelled correctly in my notes. They're very light, they're lively, in motion, as opposed to the iron solidity of the mailbox door, or the handle of the mailbox door. Of course, he doesn't have to say handle, which is very still until the person in the poem pulls it. Mm-hmm. But so you've got that light buoyant snow juxtaposed with the heaviness, the solidity of the cold iron, which gives the poem some depth, and it gets depth in other words, in other ways as well. But the sound of the mailbox creaking open, we don't hear the snow. Well, maybe you do hear the snow. I don't know, with the wind. If one can bring a little bit of wind in, but more of a visual than an auditory image.
And again, this leaves the reader to imagine, right? Everyone has their own particular experience with the weather, with how snow acts. And we don't have description of what the snow is here, but it could very well be ice pellets. Small, minute ice pellets that get caught up in the wind and get peppered against the wall, or they get peppered against your face. Each person's going to have a different experience and relate to it differently. One of the things that I think that the reader can really appreciate is the fact that it is a complete story. It has a beginning, it has an end, and it leaves questions behind. A good story will always leave questions behind, because number one, where did the narrator come from? Well, presumably from home, but not necessarily so. He's coming into town late at night. Well, why late at night? Why not at noon? Okay. It's been snowing. Well, why leave home at all if it's been snowing? No. I think the revelation is at the very last line is that no, he'll just waste more time. Well, that leads to a sense of the narrator having a sense of boredom or perhaps depression. They have to get out of the house. They have to go from where they were to come put this letter in the mailbox. But it's not necessarily an urgent, I have to do this thing. It's, I don't have anything else to do.
Yeah, and we consider poems are combinations of telling and showing. And in this 5-line poem, the first 3 lines show us things and an individual, and the last 2 consist of telling. And so he's got the privacy, and right in the center of that 4th line, the word love, and that repetition with variation of the word snow. This time it's appearing as an adjective to qualify the night, and also he uses that same term right at the very beginning of the poem. But if you took it, if you or I or anybody said, okay, this poem has the word deserted in it, and it's got the word waste. Is this going to be a depressing poem? But if as I look at the overall poem, I don't find it that way at all. But there's I think a healthy ambiguity in the very last line, where I will waste more time. In some ways, is he being critical of himself? I'm just a time waster, or is he being carefree? It's good to. He's using waste time in a good sense. I'm carefree. I think I'll drive around a little bit more, and because I'm comfortable where I am.
Again, I think this is where poetry leaves the reader to interpret what he thinks about the story, about the meaning of the words on the page. I think that's what all good writers do, is that they let the reader paint the picture. They let the reader come to the conclusion. Now, some writers are very specific about what they want the reader to see and to feel and to think. Other writers let the reader merge into the story, to experience that story in their own head. And some readers have very vivid imaginations, so very few words can paint a portrait in very vivid or stark colors. And I think that, again, this is a exceptional example of telling a complete story, but being very austere in how you structure it.
Exactly, and I think it's certainly, this is an example of one where there's a lot of leeway for the reader to give it various responses, I think, and to feel various ways depending on their own experience with snow or with mailboxes, for example. But a lot of times I'll say to myself, what if, like I said before, he made this into 6 lines instead of 5. In the 4th line, I was just thinking, what if he had said, "There is a peacefulness I love in this snowy night"? That seems less interesting to me than the word privacy, which he used.
Yes.
Privacy makes it seem more intimate.
Yes.
But the great thing is, I can share in that intimacy as the reader.
True. So let's sort of shift focus just slightly a little bit. The author, Rober Bly, what do we know about him?
Native of Minnesota, longtime resident of, I'm not sure if it's southern Minnesota. One could look that up, but did live in a rural region of Minnesota. I once got a ride in a car from Rober Bly in the city of Minneapolis, Minnesota, a few years back, but a very well known in that state and throughout the United States, certainly. And one could say, Jack, a lot of people are already familiar with this poem, but also a lot of people are not familiar with the poem. It's in his first book, and he went on to publish many more books, but this is certainly, for me, a very interesting poem to talk about. I found it real interesting to take notes about it as I was preparing for our podcast here. And you think, letter writing is part of it. So many things we don't know. We don't know, did the speaker in the poem write the letter? He doesn't say for sure, but we can assume. Who is the letter written to? Where is the letter going? What did the letter say? Was it a love letter? Was it a business letter, a personal letter? Never specified. Never has to be. The thing is, he's driving to town late to mail a letter. And there again, not only the experience of never having written a letter for some people, never having mailed one, it would not surprise me if that applied to some of the people listening to us right now. Younger people, maybe?
That is an interesting point, because while written correspondence has diminished greatly over the past couple of decades and has been replaced by digital and electronic forms of communication, we still have a post office. We still have that government service. And nothing has really taken its place. And I'll repeat that. Nothing has really taken the place of our postal service. And when he wrote this back in 1962, or at least the book was published back in 1962, the Postal Service was a mainstay of our communities, because people did write letters. They wrote a lot of letters. They sent a bunch of cards. Every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, they sent a lot of cards, a lot of, "I'm thinking of you. I'm sending this to you because I thought of you and I care about you and I want you to know what we're doing here." We don't have that much of a connection these days since we've moved to more digital, more immediate platforms where, virtually our faces are almost figuratively, metaphorically glued to our faces. The screens are glued to our faces. And we're communicating all the time, but I don't think we're saying as much. We're not communicating as much. And I think this poem illustrates this sense of the letter is being mailed. And as you said, we don't know what was in the letter. But it's still a connection point that he thought was important enough to send off. It's that point of communication that he thought it was important enough to reach out. Again, this is all with the reader to interpret, to speculate about, to question. But this just illustrates how 5 simple lines can invoke a discussion about people's motives, about people's perspectives. Because as a reader, you're interacting with the author. Whether you realize it or not, you are interacting with his image, his picture, if you will, of the setting that he has created. You, the reader, are walking into that of your own free will to participate in that. Even if it's vicariously, you have agreed to join the writer in that journey. And that's what letters do. When you drop them a letter in the mailbox, it takes its own journey. It goes from where you drop it to where it's received. That's the journey. The person who opens up that letter continues that journey by reading the letter. And perhaps by responding to it. You, the reader, whether you realize it or not, are still part of that journey. When you're sitting down and you're thinking about, well, what was in the letter? Who did it go to? Immediately you begin to think about the person who gets the letter. Again, this little poem, a complete story, leaves questions that are unanswered by the author, but you, the reader, will pose some answers.
One other thing that I'm realizing now too, earlier I mentioned 2 of the key images. Well, the mailbox being one in the swirls of snow, and very obviously the letter itself is a key image, and really one that has more mystery to it perhaps than that mailbox in the snow, because it can cause us to ask so many questions or wonder, about the nature of it, as we pointed out. But certainly, it's the reader's journey as well as the speaker in the poem. Mm-hmm. I remember liking this poem when I first read it, which is over 50 years ago, and I like it just as much today. Certainly among my favorite modern poems.
Excellent. I think we have covered the highlights of this particular piece of work. Before we sign off, is there anything additional you want to add?
Simply, I think this poem, as with the previous one that we did in our previous podcast, Rodeo, we could say, this is, you read it, you take pleasure from it. I think first and foremost it ought to give us some pleasure or some illumination, satisfaction, say of driving to town to mail the letter, this is what poetry can do, this is what it can sometimes be.
Thank you very much, Pete. With that, we thank you all for joining us for One Poem on Lee County Podcast. Until next time, everybody, peace and grace.